Good morning, Frank, and thanks everyone for joining us this Friday morning. We're so happy to have you here. I'm the Professional Development Director at the California Special Districts Association, Megan Hemming, and CSDA is pleased to participate in this event for the second year in a row. If we know one thing about emergencies, we know they will happen, and it's important for us all to be prepared for them. So it's exciting for us to come together, both the CSDA and the Special District Leadership Foundation, with other local government leaders and Southern California Edison and Sol Price School of Executive Education from USC, and learn about these important issues, get together and exchange information. So we're looking forward to a productive and informational day, and just so happy to be a part of it, and so thrilled to be sharing this information with everyone. So thank you so much for including us, and thanks so much for everyone for sharing your day with us as well. Thank you again.
Thank you, Megan. Good morning, everyone. My name is Frank Sarunian. I'm a professor at the University of Southern California Sol Price School of Public Policy. I want to welcome you all virtually to the University of Southern California. It's a great place to be. I am on campus, actually, in my office as we speak, and it's our pleasure for second year in a row now to join the Special Districts Association, Megan and her team, as well as, of course, thanking our sponsors and friends at Southern California Edison and Optimum Seismic for making this possible for several hundred people. We will have online today close to 300 people, and that's wonderful. And it is a topic very, very relevant and important today, especially given what's going on in Eastern Europe and the potential for cyber attacks in particular. And we do have a panel on cyber attacks particularly, but before we get to the panel, it's my pleasure to welcome Assemblymember Jackie Irwin to the program, and certainly allow her to say a few words. Jackie, of course, represents from Ventura County, the 4th District, chairs Revenue and Taxation, as well as, of course, the Select Committee on Cybersecurity, which is, again, very relevant today as we speak. I'm sure she will allude to that. Jackie has been an amazing leader from the Ventura County, very bipartisan, has been one of those who's able to get things done. So we're delighted to have you here, Jackie. Please, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Frank, and good morning, everybody. I am so appreciative of the California Special Districts Association for inviting me to make some opening remarks for this panel, and the USC Price Executive Education Forum for Local Leaders for convening today's summit. I've been working on cybersecurity since I was elected to the State Assembly in 2014, and its importance to the operation of not only government, but our daily lives has skyrocketed since. Taking the time to prepare and plan for emergencies may seem common sense for those of you in attendance today, but I would like to put into context how far we have come and how exciting it is that this summit is including cybersecurity. It wasn't until very recently that cybersecurity was truly accepted as a potential catastrophe in the making for our communities and state government. For years, the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services worked on a draft cybersecurity plan to add to the state emergency plan, what was called the Emergency Support Function, or ESF-18. I was asking in hearings, in meetings, and at briefings about its progress as news stories continued to come in about cybersecurity threats to state government. And then finally, in 2020, Cal OES published ESF-18. Less than 2 months later, in March of 2020, with COVID-19 forcing critical government departments into remote virtual work, ESF-18 was activated to safeguard California's response to the pandemic. I don't even want to imagine what cybersecurity chaos may have ensured if ESF-18 had been in some analyst drafts folders. With more cyber attacks in the news and the threat landscape expanding to more and more entities, the saying, if it's not if, but when, has become a hard truth for local government. After the series of ransomware attacks hit water treatment plants last year, I convened a hearing of my select committee to delve into the threats that face our utilities operated by both IOUs and local government. That hearing was last July, and it was sobering, but also encouraging. At the federal and state level, and even the private sector, everybody has taken a large leap in becoming proactive in their planning and development of defensive capabilities. From the various industry information sharing and analysis centers, or ISACs, to the assistance of the California Cybersecurity Integration Center, to our federal partners at DHS and CISA, that July hearing outlined the multitude of resources available to local governments gearing up to face the cyber realities before they become cyber emergencies. As you learned today from these excellent panelists, I hope you will also find the optimism that I felt last July, that with coordination, planning, and some dedicated public servants, we can all be ready for our own cybersecurity when. Thank you and enjoy.
Thank you very much, Assemblymember. What great words to start this program this morning. I am going to introduce the first panel, starting with one of my friends and colleagues here at USC, Michael Oros, who actually is our internal expert on cybersecurity and has joint appointments in various schools here at USC and has been instrumental in this field. With Michael will be, of course, Richard Pace from Southern California Edison, as well as Tom Ferguson from ALADS, the Los Angeles Deputy Sheriffs from the law enforcement side, Nora Wetzel from Burke, Williams, and Sorensen as a lawyer about the cybersecurity law. So without further ado, Michael, thank you so much for accepting our invitation. You've done it before, and it's our pleasure to welcome you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Frank, and thanks for inviting me to this opportunity to present on cybersecurity. Looking for my buttons. I hope everybody can see this. I need to get rid of this in the front. Here we go. Okay, so I'm Micah Rose. I'm with the Information Sciences Institute, which is part of the School of Engineering. It has been for 50 years now. And we're out in Marina Del Rey and also in Arlington, Virginia and Boston, Massachusetts. And we're primarily funded by the DoD and DHS and intelligence community. And so I was a brief 10-minute discussion about cybersecurity challenges in municipalities. So what are the threats? Okay, so the current threat today, obviously, has already been talked about already this morning, is the Russian-Ukraine conflict. And I want to point out, it's not just the Russian attacks that'll potentially spike up. It's all of our adversaries and competitors. In the fog of war, there's opportunity. And so we really need to be aware that an attack can come from any organization, state or non-state, individuals, opportunists, et cetera. And so this is occurring right now and will continue for the foreseeable future. And of course, ransomware, I put that in there because I think most of everybody is on today is aware that ransomware is dominating the cyber attack world, at least what we hear in the media, and that's not going to change. It's lucrative and easy to do. The biggest threat I want to point out to all of us in our cities and infrastructures is that cyber attacks pay off. This is a fact, and why? Because we don't keep our systems up to date with the latest cyber technologies and processes. We rely on legacy systems that can't be updated, at least not very easily. All you have to do is go to some government, federal government installations that you can find very old tech that's still being used. We don't have up-to-date security protocols and practices. We allow external devices, for example, to be plugged into critical systems. And these are all vulnerabilities that can be prevented, but we don't really follow the protocols. Our employees get laxed when with security protocols and procedures. They reuse passwords. They use the same password for multiple accounts. They fall to spear phishing expeditions. Again, it's human behavior. It's just, it's the way it is. We rely on third-party vendors who are vulnerable. So, a lot of our computing technology is done on the cloud now. And so, the security there is as good as the cloud. And, we hear about breaches frequently from a cloud vendor. And so, there's, it's a chain where the weakest link is the problem. And finally, we have a continuously evolving hacker community. They are very sophisticated. These are very smart individuals and entities around the world. They have the time and resources to probe and find weakness, and they rarely get caught. Again, cyber attacks pay off. So what can we do? Well, some of this is pretty obvious, but I want to bring it up again. Keep our cybersecurity defenses up to date. Install the latest malware detectors, virus detectors, etc. Stay on top of it. Replace outdated technology, if possible, isolate it. There's lots of SCADA devices that are used in our city infrastructures that have been around for 20, 30 years, and they had no security built into it. So we need to really start focusing on replacing or isolating, possibly putting me behind a DMZ or some sort of a device or a technology to protect them. Implement a zero trust model. And this is where everything is suspect. There are no employees versus non-employees. Everybody is suspected. And so you have continuous authentication and scanning. All data that comes into the system and even data that resides in the system is continuously scanned because it's suspected of being an attack vector or contributing to an attack vector. This is really where the future is going, where we just assume that the virus or the attacker is in our system. So how can we operate with that knowledge? Update cybersecurity protocols and procedures. For example, we hear about this all the time, but we still don't do it. Implement two-factor authentication. And in particular, I would avoid even cell phones and text messaging for that operation. I would highly recommend using tokens. Probably can't see it, but I got an RSA token here. I've got a CAC card from the Department of Defense. These are great devices for ensuring, well, not 100%, but 99% surety that who's actually entering their password is actually who they are. We really need to do more with that. Strong password controls. Again, people reuse the same passwords. They use simple ones. We need to, take more effort to make sure those password controls are implemented. Limit access to external sites. If you're working in an environment, prevent individuals from going to websites outside of your LAN, because that's a great way to download malware. Limit use of external devices, memory sticks, for example. Don't allow them, or if possible, and they need it, have them scanned before they're inserted. In the Department of Defense, particularly in the intelligence community, we glue shut all of our USB devices portals. We just don't allow them. Okay. And use of personal devices, bringing laptops in, etc. Just another attack vector. What else can we do? Train, and train. We need to continuously train our employees to be on alert for suspicious emails, like, again, spear phishing and phishing expeditions, but also social media attack vectors where people become familiar and friendly with you. We need to really upgrade our training protocols and increase use of cyber intelligence. Be proactive, monitor what's going on, and take steps so that you're ahead of the game. And one way of doing that is join like InfraGard, or be very familiar with your local DHS office on infrastructure protection. They offer tools and advice and alerts on what's going on, and have a backup plan when the attack occurs, and periodically exercise it. Don't wait until the actual attack occurs. It's going to occur. Again, these things we've talked about in the past, but we need to really take it serious. seriously. Build resiliency into the business model. Be able to operate in a partial mode. If one part of the of your enterprise is attacked, can you quarantine it? And I know a lot of our power companies have such implementation models, but we need to look at this from a city perspective. And again, create an onion defense system, just like in the physical world. Have multiple cybersecurity systems in place. So if one fails, the next one picks up and slows down the attacker. So what are some of the evolving technologies out there that hopefully will help us in the future? One is increased, of course, this thing is in the way. Hang on. Yeah, increased use of automation. For example, sentinels that detect and automatically respond to an attack. And these sentinels can be inside your firewall, they're on your firewall, they're outside of your firewall. There's already vendors out there that provide some of these technologies, but they're still works in progress, and they're only going to get better. But with increased attack vectors coming into our systems and the sophistication and all the data that needs to be monitored, we really need to rely on automation. Increase the sophistication of forensic tools and methods. So if there is an attack, we can figure out who did it. One, to aid in attribution, and second, lessons learned. We now know a new vulnerability. We know how it can be attacked. Let's figure out a better way to protect ourselves. And then cybersecurity built into products from the outset. Prior to really the last 5 or 10 years, our systems were built without security in mind. For example, the internet, when it was developed back in the late 60s and early 70s under ARPA, which is now called DARPA, the ARPANET security was an afterthought. And of course, we're paying for that today. And so now we need to start focusing on everything that gets developed that's going to be part of our digital world needs to have security built in at the outset. And one example of that is DevSecOps. Dev means development, sec is security, and ops is operation, where particularly in the software world, but this is also applicable in the hardware world, security is an integral part of not just the development of the technology, but also the operation of technology. There's no difference. It's security all the way. So there's some good news there. And finally, kind of closing this up, AI. AI is definitely here, and it's only going to get more used. And we have lots of research going on here at USC and across the country and the world on employing AI to help not only detect existing attack vectors, but to learn new attack vectors and to respond accordingly. So AI is really in my opinion, our hope for the future, and is definitely where we need to really invest our research dollars to help move it along. So in summary, the bad news is cyber attacks are not going away. They're only going to grow. That is the bad news. The good news is there are steps we can take now to prevent or reduce the impact of the cyber attack. And the very good news is that more help is on the way. So with that, thank you, and I look forward to answering questions at the end of the panel.
Richard, your turn.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Richard Pace, Program Manager for Southern California Edison's Cybersecurity Incident Response. I've been in this position for approximately 10 years from the early days of our program. I'll give you a quick overview of how that program is structured, how we integrate across the company, and how we interact with other utilities, external agencies, and other entities to ensure our computing environment maintains the highest levels of functionality and security. The cybersecurity is comprised of these following organizations. We have our operations center, who manage the day-to-day cyber and responds to all our alerts and possible incidents. We have an engineering group who oversees our cybersecurity tool suite. We have a constantly evolving set of cyber tools. Older technologies are retired as they start to become obsolete, and new state-of-the-art tools are implemented. We have a risk and governance organization, They manage our cyber company risk profile and our policy and standards governance for employees and vendors. And then finally, we have an awareness and outreach group who oversee the internal cybersecurity training programs and external contacts with government and vendors on various cybersecurity topics. So we are responsible for all the security of software, hardware, and personnel in the daily activities of our corporation. So as obviously, we're all dealing with right now is this, kind of monumental issue with the Russia-Ukraine incident. We have a threat landscape that is constantly changing and evolving, many times in response to the geopolitical activities occurring. As you're seeing, these can cause significant cybersecurity concerns across the United States, and that's especially true of critical infrastructure such as electric, gas, water, and sewer utilities. Most of these utilities went into a more protective mode over the past week or two in anticipation of these Russian activities. And currently, we're, of course, not only dealing with the Russian issues, but we also have nation states such as China, Iraq, North Korea, other countries across the Middle East, a lot of the African continent, various Asian countries have moderate to higher levels of threat risk to us. Then, of course, we have, as was mentioned previously, we have these more opportunistic groups or individuals. We also deal with they can be individuals or groups operating on their own, funded by whatever scams they can manage to successfully pull off. They can also be state-sponsored, where a country will fund the hackers in order to get plausible deniability from whatever activities the hackers are undertaking. Major part of what we do at Edison throughout the course of a day is significant threat intelligence sharing. Over, say a 24-hour period, I usually see somewhere between 25 and 50 emails that come to us on various threats that have been located at other utilities, at other businesses, and so on. And so that intelligence is constantly being shared. We're very much, cybersecurity folks are very open to providing information to other entities. This is not something that you want to hold on to like some sort of trade secret or anything along those lines. So we do this sharing almost religiously. We share with other industries, in addition to utilities, as it's impossible to know if a threat actor is targeting someone specific or if they're just attacking any company with a vulnerability of some kind. Much of what we share are known as indicators of compromise, which are the technical details about an attempted or successful attack. These can include IP addresses, suspicious or malicious email addresses, and/or subjects or attachments, or other details that we could use to help protect our environment. We ingest those indicators of compromise so that if an IP comes up that has been flagged as malicious, our tools will block it before it has a chance to access our network in any way. So we're also provided intelligence reports by federal agencies and by private cybersecurity companies. These can give us more insight into attack methodologies, who might be behind the attacks, what the attack goals might be, and all of those which help us think more like the attacker. We really have to be in that mindset of, what's going on? Why are they acting this way? What's the end goal? What can we do to reduce the possibility of them being successful. So we work very closely with the national, Washington, D.C., and local FBI offices in the Los Angeles region. We work with national and local Department of Homeland Security offices, Department of Energy, and other state, federal and state agencies, such as the previously mentioned Cal OES. We've also done work with the California National Guard, as they have certain branches of their air wings that actually deal with cybersecurity threats. And one thing that I wanted to bring up that was mentioned earlier that Michael mentioned about joining or integrating with other agencies, and he mentioned InfraGard. If the folks on this call, if you have not had interaction with your local FBI office, whether it's the Los Angeles field office or if it's what are known as RAs, which are resident agents in the smaller towns, I highly recommend that you do that. It's much better to have a contact within the FBI right now and have a little conversation with it, even if it's nothing more than just getting to know them and them getting to know you, and, that type of exchange. That can be extremely helpful. You don't want your first call to the FBI to be, just at the point that you've been compromised and you're fighting off some ransomware of one form or another. I think the Los Angeles field office, I believe they have 3 cyber squads, if I remember correctly. But getting back, other utilities, and not only, the big Southern, San Diego Gas and Electric and Pacific Gas and Electric companies, but also smaller utilities such as Los Angeles Department of Water and Power and the city-owned utilities also share extensively through a variety of channels. Some are specific to utilities, other are more general sharing platforms, which allow that intelligence, that information to go to banks, airports, the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, major corporations headquartered in Southern California, defense contractors, and so on. And so, that intel sharing is going back and forth across, multiple entities. And, it's a very much a constant feed. And finally, there are cybersecurity vendors that provide additional intelligence and threat details that that some government agencies may not be able to provide due to certain laws governing their operations. These vendors are many times staffed by former federal employees that worked at DHS or FBI in their cybersecurity organizations.
Thank you, Richard, for that great presentation as well. We appreciate your comments. I want to remind our audience that we will have a Q&A session at the end of the panel, so feel free to share your questions. Our moderator for Q&A will be Cole Carr, and we'll be delighted to answer questions within the time allowed to us. With that, I want to introduce our next speaker on this panel. Tom Ferguson is the director at the Association for Los Angeles County Deputy Sheriffs, ALADs, as we call them. They're friends of ours, and we wanted to welcome Tom.
I'm not going to turn my camera on. I have currently undercover operations going, and I know the audience. Some are sworn, some are not. So I'm also a current active detective with the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department Fraud and Cybercrimes Bureau. I work our Southern California High-Tech Task Force, and we're also task force officers with Secret Service, Homeland Security, and FBI. There's really not much more I can add that the previous presenters didn't already add. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, what we can offer with our services with the Southern California High Tech Task Force. We do have task force members, as well as myself, who have top secret compartmentalized clearances. And we can act as liaisons to a lot of agencies that don't have connections with FBI, Secret Service, or Homeland Security investigations. And we can provide that bridge. As far as investigations go, most investigations that we find that hack into or do direct denial of service, disruptions, etc., are going to be state actors. Very few small groups do this. Currently, I'm actually stepping out of a briefing that we're having on the Russian-Ukrainian issues. Like I said, there's not much more I can add. I'm happy to stay around afterwards if anybody has specific questions, or monitor this feed if anybody has any specific questions. Most of what we can do is initial investigations and presenting cases to the smaller businesses. Some like Southern California Edison, gas company, etc. Most of those we can start investigations and assist, but they're going to reach outside the country, and that's where our task force officer hats come into play, and we can just kind of be a liaison and a point of contact. Currently, as everybody knows or does not know, the latest destructive wiper that has come about is the hermetic wiper that was discovered on 22 February of this year. And that's going to be a direct denial of service, mostly geared toward the Ukrainian government, but we're expecting it to come our way. As with most hermetic wipers, they're used from drivers that take over certificates. And not to get too techie with everybody, but yeah, it's good to have a good IT department. Like I said, it's good to have investments in IT, spend the money, and anticipate bad news, get that bad news out quickly, respond immediately, and try and mitigate with your IT department, as well as your state, local, and federal partners. That's pretty much all I have.
Thank you, Tom. If you can stay around for Q&A, obviously that would be very helpful. We appreciate, of course, your current responsibility and understand fully your inability, of course, to turn your camera on. Thank you for your service. We really appreciate it. With that, I'm going to turn to our next panelist, our lawyer from Burke, Williams, and Sorensen, good friends of mine as well. Nora, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Thanks so much for having me. I am a partner at Burke, Williams, and Sorensen, associated with their San Francisco office. I have been designated as a certified information privacy professional with a specialty or focus in U.S. privacy law. I've handled many data breaches for clients ranging from cities, police departments, hospitals, dental offices, community colleges, universities, even credit unions. These breaches have involved information like medical information, financial information, including W-2s, but also bank account deposit information, student employee information as well. In connection with these breaches, I've advised entities with regard to their compliance with the laws that apply to them. That could be things like HIPAA or simply the state data breach notice laws that apply based on the population of the affected individuals. I've also helped clients through regulatory investigations that might ensue when a breach happens. Separately, I draft terms of use and privacy policies for websites, and I regularly perform contract reviews for cities with a specific eye towards data privacy and cybersecurity related risk. So we don't see a lot of universally applicable cybersecurity laws. We also don't see a lot of laws that mandate specific cybersecurity practices or techniques, like mandating that a certain antivirus software be used or requiring a specific patch be implemented. That's because the law is very slow to evolve, but cybersecurity is constantly evolving. That's because the attacks and vectors of attack are constantly changing. If a law mandated that a specific cybersecurity practice or technology be used, it would quickly become obsolete and outdated. That's why we more commonly see requirements to follow certain standards, like the NIST standards, that's the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which can be revised to keep up with best practices. We also more commonly see language like implementing industry standard best practices, or we see requirements to keep up with evolving threats as they emerge. It's also more common to have industry-specific regulations like the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act in banking or HIPAA for healthcare, which address security practices for a specific industry. There are some cybersecurity-related standards that public entities need to comply with. The first I'm going to discuss is in the context of the storage of public records. Government Code Section 12168.7 requires state agencies to adopt uniform statewide standards for storing and recording public records in electronic media or in a cloud computing storage service. Standards for cloud computing are in the State Administrative Manual and in the State Information Management Manual, also known as SIM. Minimum cloud security requirements are found in SIM 5315-B. Local governments may be required to adhere to these standards if they interact with state agencies with regard to IT system interconnections or data exchanges. By contract, a state agency might require the local government it's partnering with or working with to agree through the contract to adhere to the cybersecurity requirements that the state agency has to adhere to for protecting public records. There's also two laws to be looking out for. They're pending right now, haven't yet been passed. And these laws may apply to public entities and their cybersecurity practices if they're passed into law. The first is California AB 581, which requires state agencies to adopt NIST standards with regard to reporting, coordinating, publishing, and receiving information about a security vulnerability relating to information systems. A state agency would comply with this law by implementing the NIST guidelines that are published in the State Administrative Manual. Already, the State Administrative Manual requires state agencies to use NIST standard SP 800-53. NIST standard 800-53 provides security and privacy controls for information security systems and organizations. It addresses things like usage restrictions, system monitoring, denial of service protection, transmission confidentiality and integrity, and cryptographic key establishment and management. If local governments are interacting with state agencies, they may already be following or should be following NIST standard 800-53. The second pending law to look out for is AB 809. This is essentially a catch-all in that it would require state agencies not otherwise addressed by the policies and procedures issued by the Office of Information Security to comply with the standards and procedures set by NIST and FIPS. Lots of acronyms here. FIPS are the Federal Information Processing Standards that are developed by NIST. They include things like security requirements for cryptographic modules, secure hash standards, digital signature standards, advanced encryption standard, also known as AES, standards for security categorization, and minimum security requirements. Now, a statewide resource is the California Cybersecurity Integration Center. This is very helpful for preparation against cybersecurity events. It's described as the central hub for the state's cybersecurity activities and information sharing amongst participants. The CSIC is tasked with developing a state cyber strategy in accordance with state and federal requirements. It is standardizing implementation of data protection measures and strengthening cybersecurity preparedness and response. Public entities may find participation with the CSIC helpful and choose to participate and interact with CSIC to learn of emerging cyber threats and to help prevent cyber attacks. Given our time constraints today, I'm going to skip over our next few slides that apply to industry-specific cybersecurity regulations, particularly in the water and utility or energy sectors, but they will be available for you to review after the presentation. As I understand, the slides will be made available to the audience. All public entities should be using cybersecurity best practices, regardless of whether there are any specific laws applicable to them with regard to implementing cybersecurity. And the reason is because following cyber best practices reduces the risk of data breaches, which often occur as a result of a cyber attack. Public entities are all required to comply with California's data breach statute, Civil Code Section 1798.29. And that's the notice statute that applies to public entities. California's data breach statute requires all public entities who suffer a breach to notify affected individuals and to notify government agencies as well, if the breach affects a large enough number of people. Data breaches are costly to local governments and public entities in a number of ways. First, the cost of compliance with the legal obligations imposed by the data breach notice statute. This includes the cost of doing a forensic investigation to confirm if a breach, as defined by law, has occurred. The cost of preparing notice letters, the cost of mailing all of those letters, the cost of managing all the bounce backs or returns of those letters, setting up a call center to handle inquiries if your breach, affects a large enough population of people. The cost of providing identity theft monitoring and protection, which is at this point optional for public entities. There's also the consideration of whether substitute notice would be required, and that must occur if an entity cannot identify the contact information for all the affected persons. In that case, the entity has to post a conspicuous notice on its home webpage regarding the data breach. It has to notify major statewide media, and it has to notify the Office of Information Security within the Department of Technology. Separately, there's also the cost of getting an entity's operations back to normal. So that might include the recovery of lost data. That might include repairing damage. That might include reconfiguring systems. That might include replacing affected systems, software, or even hardware. And that's setting aside whether you have a ransom that's being demanded of you because you've had a breach that's occurred as a result of a ransomware attack. A lot of entities face a difficult decision of whether to pay the ransom and get their data restored, or whether to refuse to pay the ransom and deal with the consequences of that decision. There are a number of things that I recommend to prepare for a data breach. And this is particularly timely, as we've heard from the FBI earlier this week issuing notice to the public at large, but also specifically to local government to be aware of the potential for increased ransomware attacks, specifically given the Russia-Ukraine crisis going on right now. In general, public entities and utilities are targets. Even with the best cybersecurity practices in place, cyber attacks are going to occur and breaches might result. I recommend that public entities prepare for what often feels like an inevitability at this point, which is a breach. You should prepare an incident response plan, form an incident response team, and then run a tabletop practice with your plan and your team to make sure it works. The last thing you want is like a Friday at 2 a.m., a breach to happen, and you call whoever's cell phone number is listed on your plan and the number doesn't work, or this person who you've designated as the contact no longer is in that position or moved on to a different, employment altogether. So it's important to make sure that not only have you done the work to create a plan and a team, that you've practiced it to make sure that in those emergency situations, it's actually going to function like you need it to. You then need to update your plan and regularly and practice regularly. A good rule of thumb is to make sure that you visit your plan at least once a year and you do a practice once a year with it. There are great tools to help with developing an incident response plan, so you're not starting from scratch. A useful resource is the CSIC Incident Response Guide. I also have a recommendation for if a breach occurs and you are going down your steps of your incident response plan. Number one, don't call an incident a breach. A breach is a law-defined term. You might be conceding that a security incident or event is actually a data breach under law if you have a bunch of communications and emails calling an event a data breach. So just something to keep in mind, refer to security incidents, security events, potential compromises. Avoid using that word breach because it is a legally defined term. Another recommendation that I have is get your lawyer involved in your communications right away. Whether you have a lawyer through your cyber insurer, which I'm going to talk about in a moment, or you have a lawyer like me, I'm a breach response counsel. Get your lawyer involved right away because the attorney-client privilege can shield communications amongst your participants and protect them from discovery in a lawsuit later on, or protect them from Public Record Act disclosure requests if you have the attorney-client privilege that's protected over those communications. Public entities can and should obtain cyber insurance. This can help with the cost of a breach. Cyber insurers provide breach response counsel to help you navigate through all your compliance obligations in a breach. And your insurer may provide useful resources with implementing cybersecurity best practices to hopefully prevent a breach from ever happening. Public entities can consider participating in a risk management program. The Cal JPIA and the California Intergovernmental Risk Authority are both organizations to look into for those offerings. A risk vector, not always front of mind, is cyber attacks that can be perpetrated through your vendors. That's what happened with what we heard in the news with Target, right? A vendor to Target is the cause of the breach that we saw published and discussed in the news for a long time. So it's really critical to ensure that on the front end of things, you've made sure that your vendors are doing what you need them to do to try to minimize your risk of a cyber attack through your vendors. The way that you can do that is through your contracting process with your vendors. So you want to make sure that your contracts have robust cybersecurity and data privacy requirements for your vendor to adhere to. You want to pass through any requirements imposed on you to your vendors with regard to the information or systems that the vendors are going to have access to. And you also want to make sure that you require contractually that your vendor carry cyber insurance itself, so that it is, if it is the source of a breach, they can cover the cost of it. Finally, a useful resource for reviewing your contracts with vendors is the Alliant Guide for Insurance Requirements, which helps with providing recommended clauses and provisions in your contracts with vendors. Thank you for your time, and feel free to ask questions. You can always look me up on Burke's website. It's Nora Wetzel. We always say Wetzel like Wetzel's Pretzels. So thank you so much for your time today.
All right, and thank you for that, Dr. Wetzel. It was great to hear not only your presentation, but everyone here just to get on. This is a very, very nicely timed presentation on cybersecurity and some of the best practices here, especially given the ongoing situations that we have going on overseas and how they impact us here in the U.S. and as critical infrastructure operators. So thank you so much for that. We're going to go ahead and get popped over into the question and answer period. As mentioned, my name is Cole Carr. I am the California Special Districts Association's Public Affairs Field Coordinator for the Central Network and the Central Valley, as well as the Federal Advocacy Coordinator for the National Coalition of Special Districts, as well as CSDA. I will be taking over the Q&A here. And it looks like we got a couple of really good ones here that have popped in. And I'm going to really just kind of open this up a little bit for all of you here, just a little bit. This one came in early on, but this is from Stacy. It's in an age where social media is such an important tool for communication and public messaging. How can we use these tools to safely avoid cybersecurity threats?
Well, I answered Stacy. I typed in my answer, but I'll try to repeat it as best I can remember. One, social media is here to stay, and there's a lot of positive things about social media, but it's also, highly vulnerable to, attack. It's an attack vector or it's an influencer. Like, for example, text messaging, SMS protocol is completely vulnerable to spreading malware. So the best thing I would recommend doing is right off the bat is just treat it as suspect. You get a text message, you get a URL in it, for example, call the individual up or find another way to communicate with the individual to confirm that this is a legitimate message that was sent to you. And it's the same thing with spear phishing and other types of attack vectors. Just, confirm before you click. That said, I do think from a research side of the house, we as researchers in the computer science sector need to continue to apply dollars to determining best practices and best methods for establishing social media platforms that have security built in. So again, a lot of these platforms are built quickly without security in mind, and we need to, in the future, make security part of the bedrock of the requirements. Over.
And I can add to that. One of the things that Michael had mentioned, how important it was to train people, and just, I know that employees, just feel like it's some sort of just constant hammering that we're doing on them to try to teach them what to look for in phishing, what to look for it even in text messages, as was brought up. But it's, Edison does an annual cybersecurity training module, computer-based, and that's every employee, CEO all the way down, that has to take it and has to pass it. And throughout the year, we do phishing exercises. And yes, they're much more complex than what a lot of folks can necessarily come up with. But even if you do something, there's an awful lot of free training materials that are out there, and you just if you've got 50 people in your organization, 25 people in your organization, whatever the count is, it takes one. And that's the only one that you need to lose control of your environment and to be severely compromised and just brought to your knees.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I appreciate those answers. Pretty insightful there. Got another question here. This one's from Isaac. And if it's all right with Isaac, I'm going to kind of dovetail off into a little bit of a follow-up question on this as well. Question is, are cyber attacks orchestrated by individuals or groups or countries most often? And jumping off of that, if you could comment, just kind of throwing this out there to all three of you, how are we seeing maybe what's different in the Russia-Ukraine crisis and some of the threats that we're seeing from actors overseas directed around this crisis? How are those different or hallmarked in a certain fashion over what we would normally see, like what Isaac is asking here?
I was just scrolling through because earlier this morning, there was a post on a Twitter account from what's known as Conti, which is a fairly well-known hacker organization. And I'll read you the wording off of this. It says the Conti team is officially announcing a full support of Russian government if any body will decide to organize a cyber attack or any war activities against Russia. We will going to use all our possible resources to strike back at the critical infrastructures of an enemy. So now you have a somewhat detached organization that is going to be acting in Russia's behalf and possibly aiming attacks around the world at whatever country, whether it's all the financial sanctions that are going into place, if there's more military support that NATO or other countries provide to Ukraine, anything along those lines, that now opens you up for this hacker collective that's going to attempt to cause you great pain and suffering, in addition to whatever you're already trying to guard against with the Russians themselves. So
yeah, if I could follow up, basically the cyber space is a battlefield right now, and it's spiked, and it's not just kinetic warfare, it's the cyber warfare. And that's another front that we have to be alert and aware of. And again, most people are not aware of it because they're not in that space. least they're on the periphery, but not in the interior. And so it is, and to sort of not counter, but accompany what Richard said, the cyber group Anonymous is come out on our side. And so they're going to attack Russia. So not only are governments and state actors going after each other, but we now have non-state actors going after each other. And it's definitely spiked in the last couple of weeks, and for sure in the last day or two. A lot of activity going on. I suspect it'll go on for quite some time. And it's not just, the obvious state actors and some of the non-state actors. I mean, everybody, all of our competitors are going to get involved in this.
All right. Yes. Thank you, Dr. Rose and Richard, on that. I appreciate that. We have time for one more question here, and it's in the open Q&A. This one is, I'm sorry, Thomas, did you have something to add there? Apologies, Thomas.
So on the law enforcement and what we're seeing, in answer to your question, yeah, we do see some localized hacktivists, if you will, and some individuals. Most of them that we see on the scales that Southern California Edison and the rest are going to experience are state-sponsored actors, especially the GRU, Russian intelligence service, and their group Sandworm, as well as the Democratic People's Republic of North Korea and China are all actors who we're seeing links back to. Most of it in recent times have been more toward Eastern Europe, especially Russia, and they're a very powerful and I think sometimes underestimated cyber actor because they're not afraid to combine coordinated attacks as well as physical attacks. And they've been hacking the Ukraine since 2014 and have a lot of experience. And one of the things that we need to think about is the sanctions that were just levied against Russia, economic sanctions. No cryptocurrency was touched in that. And there's a lot of cryptocurrency out there, and they're still funding their resources with cryptocurrency. So that's something we need to think about and that we need to start looking at and following the money. Okay, that was it. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that. And then we're going to do one final quick question in like the minute that we have left. This one's from Roland Sprewell. He says, as a former member of a local fusion center, JRIC, and specifically having been assigned to a critical infrastructure protection cell that conducted free security and vulnerability assessments to various sectors, including small businesses, I have found much of the Department of Homeland Security funding has been siphoned away. This, in my opinion, has left many sectors in the small business arena, which is nearly 50% of the US economy, that normally wouldn't receive CISA attention out in the cold. The question is, does anyone have any knowledge as to whether repatriation of these much needed CIP, that's critical infrastructure protection groups, or local fusion center engagement is being reprioritized, especially given the present Russia-Ukraine crisis?
I'll take a stab at answering that. I don't have personal knowledge of any increase in spending. However, I think this uptick in attacks from Russia and other competitors, and I call China and others competitors instead of adversaries. That seems to be the name of the day. But I think where we can change that calculus is we really do need the private sector to step up and say it is serious. They have an enormous influence on spending by our federal government. And for the most part, they've sat on the sidelines and have not really pushed it because of privacy issues and intellectual property concerns, giving away data, sharing data. And I think we need to find a way to change that calculus so that they become part of the solution and they influence heavily our federal government into redirecting funds where it needs to be redirected. And I don't think until the private sector really gets on board that we're going to see an increase in spending by the federal government. That's my humble opinion.
I think, yeah, the other issue with it is also the large entities that have lobbying arms and the ability to watch what's going on in Washington. We get information back as to what the status is on funding, and if our CEO or our president needs to get involved with that in order to help move that along in one way or another. Those types of things happen, but it's a large corporation. We have the assets and the obvious need to ensure that the government is pushing towards a more protective stance that would work well for critical infrastructure across the country and large and companies. But having that filter down to smaller and medium-sized corporations, I think that's the bigger issue. Because if you do, if you see how many hospitals have been ransomwared over the past couple of years, and it's been brutal for them.
Yeah.
So there's those types of things to take into consideration.
All right. Well, thank you for that, Richard. And with that, we are out of time on this section of our event today here on cybersecurity. Again, we want to thank Assembly Member Jackie Irwin for joining us a little bit earlier. We've got Dr. Michael Rose, the Research Associate Professor of Civil and Environmental Engineering at USC, as well as Richard Pace, the Senior Advisor for Cybersecurity at Southern California Edison, Thomas Ferguson, Director of the Association of LA Deputy Sheriffs, and then Dr. Nora Wetzel from a partner with the Burke, Williams, and Sorensen group. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We appreciate your insights. It's been a very good, fun, and informative panel. Thank you all.